Hey guys, welcome to Think Aside. Uh, Today I want to talk about taxes, and this is just going to be a short video. I don't have a whole lot to say about them. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory, but there's a few things about them that I thought maybe would, I don't know, pique someone's interest or kind of give them a little more information that maybe you didn't have before. And there's two main things that I want to talk about, two main things that I've kind of come to understand as fundamentals. And so the first one I learned from, I believe it was from Robert Kiyosaki or whatever, Kiyosaki, I think is his name. It's Rich Dad Poor Dad. I've referenced him before, and he talked about at one point about taxes and how they are, and this is obviously information that comes from elsewhere, and he had reiterated it as I'm reiterating it now. But the idea that taxes aren't necessarily something that is always, they don't always happen, right? You see small business, I mean, a big time, a big, not big time, but a big example would be Trump, right? And for a lot of time, people were saying like, show us your tax documents and all these things, and because they were saying how he hadn't paid taxes in years, he avoid taxes and stuff like that, avoids taxes, and we inherently, I think, will want to see that as like, well, we have to pay taxes. That's not fair. Why doesn't he when he has a bunch of money? So taxes. One of the things about taxes is that it's like an encouragement to better the society. I'm not saying that's inherently okay. I'm not saying that there should be taxes. I have my own opinion on taxes and the things I don't like about them and that they're in place. But the kind of the one of the goals of taxes, I would say, seems to be that it encourages one to either one give value to the company, and then as a turn, because like, okay, so like say you're working for a company, right? That company, the owner, doesn't have to necessarily pay taxes, but that's because they are giving value to society. They're giving value to the government, the country. And so because of that, there's an incentive to, instead of paying taxes, they can do other things to better their company that in turn allows them to better the government, the society, the country as a whole that much better. And so I'm not saying that they don't avoid this by buying themselves a new car and stuff like that, because they do. It's one of the catch 22s to this kind of law or whatever you want to call it. But that is one of the goals of taxes, is it's to incentivize one to either build up their company more, and because they're giving value to the country, they are able to write off a lot of things for their business as a result. The other side is that if you're not giving value to the country, then you pay taxes, right? You pay money to give value back. And so if you're working for a company that's giving value, then yes, you're giving value to the company, and yes, as a result, you're, giving value back to the people, but the government doesn't see it as that. And so you end up having to pay federal tax and income tax and state tax and all those things, because that's your way of, like, there's no way you can invest. Like, you would think if you were investing in yourself or something like that, giving back value, you would be able to, but when it comes to W2 employees, you really, you can't, as far as I know anyway. That's the thing. I'm not an expert by any means, but so that's kind of one of the interesting things about taxes, is that that's why businesses don't have to pay taxes a lot of the time, is because they're incentivized to spend it back on themselves, so that way they can grow bigger and help more, and help the country the way that they are meant to. And so the government says, like, okay, because you're giving us value, you don't have to pay taxes as long as, type thing. The other side of things with taxes that I learned just recently is that taxes, legally, you have to pay them in fiat money, right? You have to pay it in the US dollar in the US. And so inherently that doesn't seem all that bad, but what it does is it gives the US dollar more of a reason to exist. It gives it more validity. it makes it so it continues to need to be. And so, for instance, like say, and that's what I was learning about how like privileged money is a thing, right? So like the US dollar is privileged money because it has some of the tax exemptions that other assets don't have. So for instance, like say you put your dollar accrues interest, right? So you gain say 10% over a year on fiat money. You're not going to have to pay taxes. Assuming you're just holding money, you're not going to have to pay taxes on that money for the gains. It's privileged, it's exempt from that. But if you were to be holding, say, Bitcoin, and that gains value like any other asset, then that's something that you would need to pay taxes on, from what I understand. Like if your house goes up, appreciates, so you have to pay taxes on that, the gains, to capital gains. And so that's that's kind of the issue with it, is that taxes very much so want to, need to exist in order to keep, specifically make you pay taxes in the fiat system in order to keep that fiat alive, to keep it necessary. Because if you could just say hold Bitcoin, gain, whatever on that asset, and then just pay taxes in that Bitcoin, then it you escape the need for fiat ever. You don't need it at that point at all. And so it makes it one less reason why it needs to be. And so that was an interesting thing to me, that taxes have that feature, whatever you want to call it, underlying law in there because it's necessary to keep it alive. And that's just one more thing that, the fiat is kind of holding on for dear life because of it. But I don't know. I wanted to talk a little bit about the first idea of it, is that, like I was saying, with how you're kind of incentivized in a sense to give value back to the country. And in its purest form, that sounds pretty good, right? It's not inherently bad. Of course, it has its flaws and it has things that are taken advantage because of that. But when we look at it that way, then instead of, I would say, standing with the whole and saying like, well, if you're rich, you should have to pay money. If you're, your business owner and your business is making a lot of money, you should have to give taxes. Instead, let's look at it as, they don't have to because they have a business. How can we do that same sort of thing to avoid taxes, but legally avoid taxes? And, obviously one of the answers is opening or starting a small business. Of course, there are starting fees and there are the operating agreement you have to create, and you have to figure out the person, the representative, and all these things. But it's not too complex. The biggest thing is, of course, not jumping into it. Instead, starting a business plan, figuring out your target audience, figuring out all of those things, so that way when the time comes, it's not just you spending money and not making any. And of course, it takes time to grow. um, the majority of small businesses, from what I understand, do fail. And I think a lot of that comes down to just like anything else. It's like if you're gonna jump onto three rocks and the rocks are slippery and you don't account for that and you just jump barefoot onto those rocks, you're probably gonna fall. But if say in some weird scenario you need to cross those rocks and you have a towel you can lay down, or you can put grippies on your feet or something like that. Like you can prepare for it. When you prepare for it, then you're more likely to succeed. If the majority doesn't prepare for it, then it would make sense that the majority would fail. So I'm not saying that's the only reason. Of course, there's many other reasons, other factors into, acting against them. But I think that's an important thing to understand, is that taxes aren't inherently, meant to or not meant to be paid. Like they are how they are, and we can either take that to our advantage and use the laws written the way that they are to our advantage, or we can kind of just be upset with it. And there's nothing wrong with either one, as long as you're willing to accept that it is how it is. And that's the thing, is like it may not be right, but we have to, whether it's right or wrong, it is. And so we need to use it to our advantage as best we can, so that way we're not a victim of it, we're not manipulated. And so, you know maybe consider small business and figuring out exactly what you want to do with it. And that, of course, can be an avenue for freedom and things like that as well. And just do it carefully, plan it out. I'm I've learned from experience that sometimes just jumping through the hoops and thinking it'll be great doesn't always work out exactly how you want it to. Sometimes you have to go back, and I've had to reevaluate and determine how exactly I can move forward and how I can, instead of making it a small business a liability, instead making it something that works for me. Of course, like that's the whole goal behind it. Um, but yeah, taxes. Thanks for thanks for watching.